So a reminder, on this day, it was Wednesday, October the 19th in 1977, the apartheid government swooped and banned black consciousness organizations and newspapers critical of the regime. You saw some of them there, and that came not much more than a month after the death of Steve Biko in detention. Well, to discuss, we're joined by Paula Fray, who is the CEO of frayintermedia, as well as Dr. Marenet Jordaan, who is a lecturer and researcher at the Department of Journalism at Stellenbosch University. Thank you both for joining me tonight. If I may start with you, Ms. Fray, can you reflect on the significance of this day in 1977?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's really important that when we commemorate this day, the day when the Minister of the then Minister of Justice, Jimmy Kruger, actually ordered the arrest of editors and the closure of newspapers, I think it's really, really important that we recognize almost the fragility of our media, that this is something that, and the role that our media plays in a democracy, that it's something that we must actually be mindful of all the time. The reason why media were targeted amongst other institutions at the time is because of the role that media can actually play in a democracy. And so for me, Black Wednesday is always a time of reflection for us as journalists to do the kind of introspection that the former Ombud was talking about, where we need to be looking at whether the role that we play in the society is the role that we should be playing and could be playing, and really to reflect on the value of media in a democracy.
Very quickly, and we'll talk about all of those issues, self-reflection so important, but in that insert there, The World was the largest circulation black newspaper that was banned that day. Staying with you, Ms. Fray, what difference could it have made, do you believe, if it was allowed to stay open?
I mean, so clearly it was a threat to the apartheid government. I mean, and I think one of the issues that we see is that not only the newspaper being shut down, but also journalists within the newspaper being banned and being put under house arrest. And I think that the huge difference that it would have made would be to continue to speak truth to power and to hold, will certainly shine a light on apartheid government and shine a light on what was happening in the country. And I think the role that the media plays in a democracy is essentially the role that the World and the Weekend World were playing, which is to write about and report about the things that people want to keep hidden. So I think that if they had not been banned, that certainly a lot more information would have been accessible, and a lot more people would have been knowledgeable about what was happening in the country, particularly because of the kind of stories and the kind of coverage that the World actually had at the time.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about other publications, I think there is still a lot of older white South Africans who don't know what was happening sort of under their noses at the time. Dr. Jordaan, before we talk about fake news and the current challenges, do you think, perchance, that South Africa is unique? And I'll give you an example. Years ago, decades ago, I was following President Thabo Mbeki around, and there were claims against Jacob Zuma at that stage. A rural area after rural area we visited, I was a young journalist, and almost universally those claims against him were not believed. Do you think South Africans have always had a healthy or even unhealthy skepticism of the news because of what happened under apartheid?
Francis, I think that's an excellent point that you're making. Although the most recent Reuters digital news report about South Africa says there's kind of a 50-50% trust in the news in South Africa. So I think definitely the fact that the media has, or that the media in the past, especially the public broadcaster, if I may, was under such an influence, hiding so much. And not just, obviously, a lot of people didn't know what was going on, and the people who knew what was going on didn't see it reflected in the publications and the broadcasters that they were exposed to. So I think they felt cheated in a way, and maybe that also increase the mistrust in the media over time.
Yeah. All right. So let's zoom to present day. Dr. Jordaan, you've already spoken to this 50-50. Just tell us a bit more, because of course one thing we hear so often now is fake news, that journalism is involved in factionalism, politics. How would you describe the state of media in South Africa?
I think to use the words of Chris Roper in that report is we've always had quite a healthy press freedom, and we as South Africans have access to media. We as South Africans have the choice of media. But the problems that you have raised are so relevant. The fact that, and I don't like the word fake news, misinformation, disinformation, that's really a problem in South Africa. And it makes it very difficult to distinguish between what is credible news sources, and it also makes the work of professional journalists so much more difficult, because we do, of course, have those credible news sources, and they are making huge differences in the South African landscape, not just the media landscape, but the landscape in general, if you think about the role of the Gupta leaks and related news reports or investigations. But unfortunately, the media, I think somebody talks about, scores their own goals as well. The mistakes that the media make, the lack of accountability in some cases undermines the trust in the media. So it's not just attacks on press freedom from outside, it's also internal strife, internal lack of accountability that can really hurt the media in the long term.
Ms. Fray, do you agree? How would you describe the state of journalism in South Africa right now?
So, I just want to go back to the issue of trust. I think the growing lack of trust is one of the greatest challenges that we actually face at the moment. Notwithstanding what seemed to be a convergence of crises for the media, and the economic crisis, declining quality of journalism. I think the crisis of trust really is one of the major crises that we face. And what concerns me is that very often that there is a deliberate campaign of disinformation that actually undermines people's trust in the media. And you know what Marenet was talking about earlier on. I mean, we all have issues of misinformation where people unintentionally pass on information that is incorrect. But what concerns me is a real campaign against the media with issues of disinformation. So when you talk about stories being out there, and people not really believing them, I think that we need to ask ourselves who really benefits when there's a lack of trust in the media. I can remember as a young reporter on the day that former President Nelson Mandela's release was announced from prison, that people actually smuggling us into hospitals and people wanting to tell their stories. And now there's such a high level of hostility, and somebody benefits when there's a high level of hostility against the media. I'm not saying that the media isn't blameless, and I'm not saying that there aren't things that the media can actually be doing in order to increase the levels of trust. But there is also a campaign of deliberate disinformation that we need to be aware of.
So who benefits? Who's behind this?
Well, I mean, if you look at stories of disinformation, if you look at how journalists are sometimes fed deliberate disinformation that result in stories because there just aren't the right kind of checks and balances in the newsroom. It sows confusion. It sows it heightens a lack of trust in the media. So that when there are real stories, when there are investigations that actually expose real wrongdoing, people are more likely to say, "Oh, that's fake news."
So are these the political baddies sort of benefiting?
Well, I mean, it's easy to say political baddies, but a lot of people benefit from disinformation. It's political principles. It could be business people. It could be general people, generally corrupt people that would benefit it. And I think that there's a real need amongst the media to remind themselves, but also the public at large, what role media plays in a democracy. I mean, if we want to hold power to account, if we want people to make informed decisions as citizens and to be active citizens, you need a media that is trusted and you need a media that is credible.
Yeah. Dr. Jordaan, you brought up... Sure, come in.
Sorry, can I pick up on something that... Paula said about the media having to make it clear that what the role is of the media in society. People need to understand the importance of the media in democracy. And I think that speaks to the fact that we often talk in South Africa about the lack of literacy, the reading and writing and those kind of skills. But there's also a lack of media literacy. Who can we trust? what's the difference between WhatsApp and, a report by News 24. So I think the media also can do a little bit more, but it shouldn't be left up to them.
Yeah. Well, thank you, because that was the question. What can we do to highlight good journalism? So the Gupta leaks was the example you used. What happened there changed the course of this country. And beyond the leaks, a lot of investigations have really exposed a lot of things in this country, state capture. Dr. Jordaan, how do we highlight and help people discern the good from the bad?
I think there's an increasing trend towards news organizations actually explaining how they do their journalism. It's the story behind the story. Journalists talking about what it took to report on the story, what they struggled with, what they were threatened by. Books like The Daily Mavericks, 10 Decades of the Daily Maverick, where they tell the story behind the story, or, fun videos of journalists talking about what happens on a daily basis in the newsroom. I think it's a small step, but it really helps people to understand, journalists don't suck things out of their thumb. They are not always at the beck and call of government spokespeople, but they actually want to make a difference, as Paula said, to democracy.
Yeah. Ms. Fray, what do you think? One reason we know people don't pay for good journalism, that doesn't help. I remember reading research saying that over time, with the huge sort of deluge of information, people would actually start becoming more discerning. But we know that the opposite has happened. A lot of people around the world getting their news from Facebook, sort of being fed according to algorithms. How do good journalism houses fight those sort of trends?
So, one of the really interesting things that happened when with the pandemic is that we just saw a shift to mainstream media where people actually began to realize the value of credible, verified information. And I think that's what journalism brings to the table, is verification. You were asking earlier on, what do we do in order to highlight good journalism? I think that we need more transparency. I think that journalists need to just show how they're doing, how they report their stories, etc. But there needs to be a process of introspection. Just as we hold everyone else to accountable, I think journalism must hold itself accountable. We must be quicker to apologize. We must be quicker to correct. We must be quicker to be introspective about ethical issues, about the challenges of the day. I think that when people recognize that essentially, yes, journalists make mistakes as well, but that they are driven by a fundamental need to bring truth to the public, I think that there will be a greater build-up of trust. And I think that's really important.
Let me give you the final word, Dr. Jordaan. Is all of this possible given the lack of money, the shrinking resources? We're going to look at retrenchments planned at the SABC a little later on. But we know that the media space is getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
I think what we always tell our students is the platforms may change, but the need for professional, verifiable, accurate journalism will never disappear. People need information to live their lives, and journalism is the system that gives it to them. So I agree, it's tough circumstances, but people are being inventive. They have membership models, they have donors, they have constructive journalism. So I think that if we have the people in the media industry who really cares and who are really innovative and entrepreneurial, then we can fight not only against disinformation and a lack of public trust, but also against more sinister forces in economic impact.
All right. Well, thank you for wrapping us up on a positive note. That was Paula Fray, who is the CEO of frayintermedia, as well as Dr. Marenet Jordaan, who is a lecturer and researcher at the Department of Journalism at Stellenbosch University. Thank you for the great chat tonight.